right, welcome to the 2016 seed&spark Teradek Innovators Brunch at the Sundance Film Festival. I left that part out. We are about to do the panel, Will VR Kill Film? And I was just on the previous panel talking about things that I know somewhat, and now I'm back to ask questions because this is stuff that I don't know. We are happy to have the panelist James Kaelan, who's the creator of The Visitor, which is at Slamdance, but you also were a producer on a Sundance VR project that is here. And we also have Saschka Unseld, the head of Oculus Story Studio. Did I butcher the name?
You mean the Story Studio or my name?
No.
No, you
didn't butcher the Story Studio.
No, all good.
Okay, and Jessica Brillhart, who's the principal VR filmmaker at Google. And, also, Luis Blackaller, who's the creative director at Wevr. And so I think before we get into whether VR is going to murder celluloid, let's talk about how you came to VR, what the light bulb moment was for you that really inspired you to pursue this with your career. Why don't we go from the end back, James?
Well, so I'm created a film with some of my collaborators at Seed&Spark and Bright Ideas called The Visitor that was at Slamdance, and that project came about because last year we got connected with the folks from Wevr and just went into their offices and put on headsets and just watched some demos, had our minds blown, realized that this was not just a fad but a new method for storytelling that was quite different than cinema, and we knew that we wanted to experiment in the medium and figure out what was possible, what was affordable, what wasn't affordable, what the language of the medium was, and so we jumped into it head first over the last year.
I think, I mean, it's not that VR is the one and only medium for me. It's I love film. I still do film. I love theater. I'm trying to do theater collaborations. If I would be a better writer, I would write. But I do. What is fascinating for me about VR is that it's such a different mediums to all the other ones. It's not like, oh, it's just stereo movies or something like this. It's uniquely different, and so there's a lot more experimentation in it, which I like a lot. And the other thing that is incredibly liberating in VR is there is no establishment. There is no kind of existing monetization pipeline and kind of royalty of VR filmmakers and kind of all that kind of gluttony you have from 100 years of film industry. Not, again, I love film, but for all the projects I do in that realm, it's such an uphill battle to do things, and VR is such a communal kind of, everyone's the same, everyone is kind of experimenting and everyone's learning from each other. And as someone trying to do artistic things and stories, it's a very liberating thing to be in such an environment versus something where you're basically this tiny person knocking on someone's door and not being heard.
So I actually thought that VR was pretty gimmicky about a year ago, more than a year. It's weird to think that it's been less than a year that I started doing anything.
Did you tell me a year ago that was a fad?
Huh?
No,
I don't know. Anyway, no, but I got approached. I've been working at Google for the past 6 years now. I've been a filmmaker for them. And then I got emailed by an engineering team saying, hey, we built this 360 stereoscopic camera, and we know you're a filmmaker here. We'd love for you to test it out. And I was like, all right. And like, but it's very rare that like there's that kind of communication. And especially when I thought, okay, someone's building a camera here? Like, that's crazy. So I met with them, and I was expecting to see like something with like 5 arms or something. It would be weird. But I got there, and they showed me footage from it, and it was just them hanging out, like, and them just being like, you know, like, yeah, like going around the camera, and like, I mean, they have no cinema background at all. They're engineers, you know. They probably have some taste, but. And I saw the footage. I mean, hey guys. No, but I saw the footage, and I was so moved by it. And I was like, if this is something that they can make just from hanging out with it, like what are the other possibilities? And I knew I could help them, and I knew that that was something I wanted to help them do.
It's funny because I guess I'm also in the category of I stumbled upon it by accident and didn't care about it. All I knew about VR before I started working on it was that there were some movies like Johnny Mnemonic and the one with the lawnmower, and that was for me it, right? But I was working at this company, Wevr, and we were doing general digital production services and things that involve making apps and film and stuff like that. And we've had a toy project for a while called The Blue, which ran on computers, and we were porting it to the iPad. And then there was this Kickstarter thing called Oculus Rift that our CEO got one and just put it in there, and it kind of like, it just pushed the whole company in the direction of virtual reality. And I was working there, so I was all of a sudden kind of like, okay, you're going to do virtual reality. And I was like, okay, let's do this thing. And it was a very interesting process of not knowing anything about it, but at the same time starting to try it out and realizing how there's nothing. That was like, almost 2 years ago, I think. There was really nothing out there other than game engines that could kind of like support creative work, really. So we were kind of like trying to figure it out from scratch, like how do you film, how do you post-produce, how do you record the sound. We made a bunch of experiments that were all kind of like not really able to get us there. We used them as demos. We showed it to James, for example, and many other people to kind of like try to inspire them to kind of like come make VR with us. And over time, I just started getting it, and I started to realize how much different it was from every other medium that I had worked with in the past. And it was just because of this frameless space that you get immersed into, whether it is fully interactive and you're in like a completely simulated world where you can do anything, or just a 360 video. Just the fact that you can't really tell where the end of the frame is, and that doesn't exist anymore, and you kind of like need a new language to tell your stories. That just got me, and ever since I've just been trying to figure out how can we just make things with what we have that push the language forward. That's
James and Jessica and Luis, from the, I guess all of you now. I guess
I was like, what?
I was going to stick to the filmmakers, but coming to it from a filmmaking background, how do you? What have you found to be the differences in telling stories in this immersive 360-degree space?
Well, something that Luis was just speaking to about the idea of, you think about cinema traditionally as a canvas, as a two-dimensional space in which composition is your primary language. That goes completely out the window. VR is about an environment and isn't about a space. And there's obviously the techniques that you use, that the camera used to be the primary like vehicle for controlling what the viewer did. Those disappear, and now, like, because you simply cannot direct the viewer to look at anything unless you motivate them through sound or through light or through color or through line. And in that sense, it becomes much more like theater. And it's really fascinating to attempt to tell a story in 360 degrees, because literally you have 2 hemispheres or 4 quadrants with which to tell different pieces of a story, and it opens up multiple viewing opportunities. Like a film can literally be infinite different variations depending on where you're facing while you're watching the experience. So that's so complicated. It has obviously relationships to immersive theater, but that's where we're excited to be experimenting right now. And our piece that's up at Slamdance uses architecture as a character to immerse you into a space that you could just spend an hour looking at because of the reflections in the mirrors and the pool in the house. So anyway, long-winded answer.
How about you, Jessica?
Where do I begin? Well, for one, it's a lot about presence, which is something that we never necessarily need to. I mean, we thought about it a little bit, like, okay, you sit in a theater and you watch something, or you sit next to a computer and you watch something. But the simple act of someone actually existing, or the convincing, trying to convince someone that they're in an environment, it does quite a lot to the mind. And I think a lot of the nuances of the medium and the stuff that the medium actually wants to do and the way that what it wants to explore has a lot to do with someone psychologically being in a space. So the idea of that, you can't necessarily force them the way, to look at something is something that we need to accept. But then what do we do to premeditate maybe where they might look in a space? Using probability to figure out where they might look, what's the chances that they might look, what are the possible ways that we may experience something in a space. And then craft based on that. And it's a really interesting dance between what a creator would want and what a viewer will do or might be inclined to do. And so from editing to crafting a space to acting to a lot of that stuff has a lot to do with that.
Also, you have a piece here, Resonance, which is very much not about necessarily, well, it is about where you're looking, but it's a violinist, and so it's also very much about sound in 360 degrees. Can you talk a little bit about that side of things? Yeah,
I mean, sound's immensely important. It's always been important for film too, but we've somehow always managed to shove it as the last thing we talk about. There's a really awesome piece called Notes on Blindness, which is a VR piece that's based on an OpDocs film that was made about a couple of years ago, but it's all based on audio, and audio's first. And I think that there's some really amazing stuff you can do with audio. For me, and actually Saschka and I talked about this piece before I even made it, but this idea of how you can change the context of what a sound does to a space. So it can exist in the space because someone's playing it. It can also exist because someone's humming it to themselves in the kitchen. It can exist because someone's playing it on their violin as a kid with their parents. And I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with it, and it really does add to the convincing nature of being somewhere.
Just to piggyback on the sound thing, I chatted with someone yesterday about the sound stuff, and I remembered a moment when a previous short film I'd done, we did a mix in Dolby Atmos, where theoretically in the theater you have these hundreds of speakers all around. And I was like, in the short film, it's most of the time it's raining, and I thought it would be so amazing to feel like it's raining on the cinema. And then we mixed that, and we had to remove it because it was distracting from the screen. The sound needs to come from the screen, otherwise you're like, whoa, what's going on there? Which was really sad because it was so beautiful, it sounded so amazing. And in VR you have that because you lose the screen, you're actually in it, and that jump that sounds make is that, for me, kind of the best kind of description of what you do with a picture.
Yeah, and that's also a really important element in terms of how to, so in one of the shots that my first film that I did called World Tour was, one of the shots was to actually give you a sense that you could turn around, which is something people are we just don't do that anymore. We see a screen and we look at it and we just kind of stay there. But if you're able to have a sound trigger behind you or trigger behind a viewer, they just turn. And suddenly the whole world opens up. And it's a very important thing to have. Otherwise you get stuck in your old ways of handling media.
Yeah, in cinema we're kind of trained to forget that we exist while we watch the film. And in VR,
definitely.
You're part of it.
Yeah.
In the spirit of virtual reality enabling some non-linear storytelling, I'm going to do the intro that I was supposed to do at the beginning of this. My name is Ryan Koo. I'm the founder of No Film School, and we would like to thank our sponsors. This is the Seed and Spark event. We'd like to thank Teradek, Frame.io, and who else? Wevr. You're here. Now let's get back to it. So in terms of will VR kill film, I think most of us probably don't think of them as mutually exclusive storytelling mediums, but I think a lot of that implies the accessibility and the spread of the technology. Obviously, Oculus having a very large recent launch. Can you guys talk a little bit about how most people, how common you think it's going to be that people are putting on headsets and the rapid acceleration of the adaptation of this?
Just to answer the question of the panel, no. And acceleration and adoption, I have no idea. I think that's exciting this year to see how rapid the adoption is. And another really interesting thing that's going to happen this year and next year is to see where it fits into people's lives. If you look at the history of TV, that has happened, like how do people watch TV, when do they watch TV, and that has informed the length of the medium, that has informed episodic, that has informed, like now Netflix and all these things have informed a complete shift in the kind of narratives you tell, but that is informed by how people use it in their everyday lives, and you don't know about that until it's out there. The same with the cell phone. Like, who knew that casual gaming would be that massive until phones were out there and you could see how people use them and when they fit into people's life. Oh, just on the commute, 5 minutes. So I have no idea how it's going to fit into people's life. I know it's right now, and I actually really like that it's a solitary thing at home. That's what makes events like this really difficult, because you have crazy long lines and it's an individual experience, which is the opposite of cinema, which I don't think is a bad thing. I love communal things, but I love singular things like reading a book as well. You couldn't have a festival where everyone sits there and reads a book, especially if there's just one copy of that book. But yeah, seeing how that is going to develop and seeing how people incorporate it into their daily lives is going to be the interesting thing that happens this year.
Right, and I think it's funny because, I mean, I agree with everything you said, and there's a lot of expectation put into, like, VR. I think probably because of the massive adoption that has happened with tablets, and before that, smartphones, and before that, the internet, right? These are things kind of like television that change the way we access entertainment or culture, and VR has the potential for doing that. But we don't know what's going to happen. Right now, it's really early. For all their features, all the headsets that we have are still fairly cumbersome, and the language that we're using to tell stories, we're still kind of figuring it out. Each one of the different headsets that exist, they have different range of interactivity, and they also push for like different kinds of experiences, and that's a great thing. And it's going to be very interesting to see in the near future whether there's a space for experiences that push us more in the direction of visiting virtual worlds, in which we can be there, and like you said, we can be a part of these worlds and interact with these worlds and be a part of the story and, you know, chase down dinosaurs and all that stuff. Or there's also a space for a different kind of virtual reality in which we might not be really there in its entirety, but more like we're present there, like ghosts or something like that. Like, I like to think a lot about VR storytelling as what happens when I dream, and it's probably what happens to all of us. It's just these collages of like moments that just unfold and somehow trigger emotions to us, and they capture us until we have to wake up the next morning. And there's a place for a format like that, I think, in which we're just going to be viewing things that are going to be told to us, and to your point, there's going to be a degree of interactivity there, but it might be that it happens at a less deliberate level than something more interactive, in which it just happens under the table and things change based on how you pay attention to the scene, how you scan it, how you choose what you're looking at becomes the trigger for what's ever going to happen to you next or something like that.
Can I be maybe slightly douchey for like a
Do you
hot
want to talk
second?
about your
Go right ahead.
No, I think the better question would be: is cinema going to kill VR?
Yeah,
All the question is hype going to kill VR?
Well, yeah, but I mean, maybe it's.
Yeah.
I should backtrack. It's not douchey. I actually do really question that, because I think that there's a lot of interesting conversation around trying to shove a medium that we're very used to creating in, at least for me especially, into a format that is asking for something very different from us. And I actually worry constantly, and even being here, I'm constantly worried, like, is my brain so wired to do this thing that, like, I'm actually incapable of really fully recognizing and realizing what this medium wants from me? And can I act on that, really? I know every time that I film something, even though, like, for instance, Stereo loves mess. It loves mess, but we're so used to compositionally setting something up a certain way. So, like, I'll film something that's messy, but then I'll also film something that's clean because I'm so worried that I might be wrong. It's a really weird place. And even to Saschka's point, like, I mean, we still haven't figured out how to show this stuff. We do it the way that we show movies at Sundance, where we have a bunch of people try to go in and see something. But it's not a social thing. It's an intimate, one-on-one conversation with you in this piece. Then how do we deal with that? But and as much of these questions are really important, we've only really had a couple of years to try to figure it out, and cinema's had 100 years, to figure it out. So, and we're asking film directors to make VR pieces, and sometimes they're not the right people to be making them, and sometimes they just dilute the area with lots of stuff that's actually kind of crappy. Like, and And meanwhile, you have these really brilliant creators that are out there making some really great stuff, and they're not the ones being heard on the format. So I think there's a lot of. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to. It's just that there's a very interesting tension between those two spaces.
And experimentation as well. They're showing here at Sundance the VR piece Collisions at the Egyptian Theater with 200 VR headsets simultaneously. So it is like that book festival. And I guess it could be social in the way if you're like holding the hand of the person next to you or something, but you're not.
But yes,
socializing.
The existing methodology of festivals and ways of thinking are all based on film, and not based on the uniqueness of VR as a medium. So in order to be out there, we have to shove it into these existing pathways that are the worst for it. I mean, one of the biggest downsides of all the amazing stuff at New Frontiers and of all the interest is you have to wait an hour, and it might be a 5-minute piece. Like, what is the expectation you have after you have to wait an hour or two for 5 minutes? Like, you can never ever possibly fulfill that expectation. So that is just hard to fit into these existing things. Or
sound too. I mean, you have that many people in a space.
Like,
and you
it's
can't
kind of
hear
like as if I would like, oh, I have this feature film. Do you want to quickly watch it on my phone
And that's how
while
we do,
all
but
these
that's how we
people
do
are
it
around?
most of the time. That's what happens. People have a headset. They're like, watch my VR piece. It's like, really? Because I don't know how to be like. I'm too like. You need to be calm. You need to be okay with like you're about to go to a different place.
It's like with a book. Like, here, quickly read my book.
Yeah. Okay, got it. Yeah, it's like what? I mean, it doesn't. Or flipping through it, right? Just like going, just okay. I got it. I guess like. I don't know. Yeah. At
some point, but there's also magical things that happen. We just, I mean, whatever. I have a bunch of headsets with my friends from Wevr, and we've been kind of like showing things around, just like the way you guys said, and I think it works.
We do.
Yeah, I know. I do think it works. I mean, we find when somebody's interested, we put them in the corner or sit them down or tell them to whatever, put the headset on. And see you in 10 minutes. And it's a see you in 10 minutes. It's not look at it in your phone. It's like they're gone for 10 minutes and you see them giggle, you see them take it off and they have tears in their eyes. It's like crazy. We just did this thing back there with a few of the seed&spark people, and we showed 3 of them the same short, and we made sure that they put the headset at the same time and they clicked on start at the same time. So they were actually watching it together, right? In a way. I mean, they were holding hands and they were watching it with like 1 or 2 seconds difference. And we know the technology will get us there when we're going to be networked like with the internet. That's actually, I mean, I think that the web is actually a 2-dimensional blueprint for what the virtual world can be, right? It's kind of like the metaverse or that thing that people say. But like what happened, which is something I was not expecting, even though I was very instrumental in figuring out how to shoot this thing and how to set up the scene and how to make sure that attention was driven kind of like as smoothly as possible, thinking about it being a VR piece through the whole thing. There's things around you, but there's things that you just build a story based on what people are looking at, and you make sure that if they didn't get this, they didn't get that, they got that, and the story comes across like you being there when something happens to you, as opposed to a very deliberate, here's a picture of this, another picture of this, and the montage that comes with cinema. But to tell to cut the whole story short, what happened was crazy. All of a sudden, I have these 3 people sitting in there, and they were like choreographed in a music video. They were just doing this, and then this, and then this, together exactly at the same time. And I have pictures on my Instagram of that. It's like insane. I'd never expected that to happen with that degree of precision. So, and we didn't want to be that deliberate on how people looked through that scene, right? It's like you're sitting, it's Hard World, and it's a great piece. If you want, you can watch it back there later. You're basically in a car driving around with a bunch of other people that are chatting about whatever. It's like the starting of a story, right? That's kind of like the setting of it. It sets the mood, it sets the tone, and we never really were that precise about you have to look to the left and then to the right and then up and then down exactly at the same time. And these people did it, and it was amazing. It was just, I don't know, it just blew my mind. And it happened in the context of this festival, which is like, it has all the problems that we've lived through, and it still happens that way. So I think there is a place for, what if nobody's killing anybody, right? It's just, the pains of trying to grow in already overly media saturated space. We have this new thing There's a lot of expectation to it. We don't know what we're doing that much, but we're figuring it out. And there's all these other players that already have their things that would like to use it or take a piece out of it. I don't know. I thought that was mind blowing to me in terms of just what you guys said.
Well, speaking about people wanting to use it, for filmmakers who are here at Sundance and want to tell stories in virtual reality, can you guys recommend some places that they would turn to, since we're used to in the film industry knowing the sort of industry and studios and producers, the way that you get a project off the ground in film, whereas if you have an idea for virtual reality, there's a lot more questions about, like, well, where do I go with this idea? Who do I pursue? Could you guys make some recommendations for places for filmmakers to turn?
We went to Wevr.
There's Wevr.
And you have a website?
Definitely. Yeah, it's Wevr.com.
There you go.
I mean, we reach out. I actually make it a mission of mine to try to reach out to creators, or actually, it's both. It's like I'll see a creator that I think has the right, like, spiritually, mentally seems to have the right mojo to make this stuff, and we'll have a conversation about it. Or someone will approach me and say, "Hey, I have this idea," and we've been talking to a lot of folks, a range of folks, from people who've never made anything before to people who have made lots of stuff before. And yeah, I guess that's sort of how we've been doing it.
Yeah, I mean, there's Wevr, there's John, there's you guys. At Story Studio, we just do internal projects, but we will more try to kind of share the things we've learned, mostly because Jess has been posting about it, and we feel bad about not posting more about it. But actually, the nice thing about VR is everything is short-form content at the moment, and will be for a while. So it's way easier to just create it yourself at home with a really tiny budget, and you don't need a massive budget, and there's not that many people doing stuff that you get recognition much faster. You don't have this avalanche of thousands of films going on. I mean, New Frontiers had way more submissions, but compared to the shorts competition at Sundance, it's nothing.
That was 1,000 or something.
Yeah. And so it's actually, I think, especially for independent artists and storytellers and creators, a really interesting field and community right now, because it is not that hard to create by yourself at home, and you can kind of self-build a camera. You can just use Unity, which is a free tool to do 3D stuff, and it's all short form, so it doesn't take a year to do, but it just takes you with a bunch of people to do it, and you get recognition because everyone is exploring it together, and everyone's very, very open for people experimenting with it. So it's that hurdle is where you would need a budget from someone doesn't exist as much.
And to that exact point, at Bright Ideas and at Seed and Spark, we're obsessed with doing things inexpensively and keeping film and also now virtual reality independent. And although Wevr supported us with an undisclosed sum of post-production help, like in terms of the actual stitching and some of the VFX, like the actual production budget for The Visitor was under $7,500, and that included the location rental, that included post-production sound. And so it is possible, because essentially in our case, we're doing a one-take film that we shot 11 takes of during Magic Hour with only natural light in a space that reflected all of that gorgeous desert light that we were seeing. So like it is possible when you think about creating a scene that is compelling as it is performed. You can port it over to virtual reality fairly simply and fairly inexpensively, because essentially we shot it on 4 GoPros with 8mm fisheye lenses, and it doesn't get much cheaper than that.
We also YouTube, I know Google, but YouTube supports 360 stereoscopic content, and so as you experiment, you can just throw it up there, see what it feels like, put it in cardboard, see what it feels like. And it's great because you actually, I always got worried. Like when I put mine up, I was like, I'm going to get really weird comments, like random stuff. And shockingly, they've been super supportive. Like people have not been like +1 or like first or but or whatever but it's like they've actually, it's been very good and very like really actually solid comments from people. So like if you have any sort of doubt about your creative abilities and you want to post tests of 360 stuff, you're going to be probably okay. You won't have to deal with like the insecurities of random people.
Well, you'll know that VR has arrived when the trolls start.
Well,
posting.
I mean, they say actually it's kind of funny. This is a side note, but like on Twitter, I got someone followed me and I saw the icon image and it was basically this like naked woman with big boobs and I was like, oh God, and I was like, okay, block. But it had VR at the end. I'm like, oh cool, that's fine because it's like, and it's like when the porn industry follows you, it's like, yeah, all right, we're an industry. This is great. So I mean, I think it's a great sign. Side note.
We have some time for questions from the audience. There's a mic floating around, I believe, and if not, then I can repeat them. In the back?
Is that on? Okay. You guys touched on this a little bit, but it seems like so much of what we're seeing in VR is monoscopic. Can you talk about your feelings about the importance of stereoscopic 360 content and how that'll affect the uptake of VR?
It definitely has a lot to do with like believing that you're somewhere. Psychologically, if you can work through a space, it actually helps for you to engage more, and the more that you engage, the more that you feel you're a part of it. I don't think stereo. There's with certain cameras, there's a certain amount of stereo drop off. So after a certain point, you don't notice it. Additionally, with stereo, it is much more. It involves a great deal more tech, to put it lightly. So you have to kind of consider who your audience is, what the platform's going to be, and if you're going to use stereo, do it because it matters to that space and matters to the amount of engagement you'll get from that space.
Yeah, I mean, there's mono 360. To be honest, there's also 180 fake VR. There's mono 360, there's stereo 360, and then there's real time where you can move around in the space. And to a certain extent, it comes down a bit to kind of how much of a hurdle do you want to put in front of yourself for creating something. It's kind of like expecting from an indie film to shoot a massive long one-shot with a Steadicam rig is maybe the wrong expectation, and you can still do it without it. You can still tell a story in mono 360. Yes, it's nicer if it's stereo. Yes, it's nicer if it would be positional, but live action doesn't work as positional right now. So whatever the project is, whatever your audience is, however much money you want to put into it, it all kind of works. And since we're early, it's all kind of accepted. So it's a mix of all those categories and all those questions for your project.
Yeah, I'd like to say something about stereo too, because I mean stereo is awesome, but where we're at with filming in stereo for VR, the technology really sucks, and it makes it 10 times more difficult to shoot something. It limits your ability to build your scene probably as much, and it also makes your post-production 10 times more difficult. So, and you get something that ends up having to make you lower the resolution of your thing to a half, because you have to show both images in what was usually going to be just a single one. And for that reason, me personally, I have chosen to go the monospace for now, because it really allows you to experiment with the language more freely. You can move your characters around more, you can get closer to the camera, you can move your camera with more freedom. Everything just becomes easier. Yeah, you end up with something that's not having that sense of depth that comes with stereo, but the stereo we have now for VR, it's still kind of crappy anyway. So it's in
argue with this one.
Yeah, I know you're working on making it better, but it's not here yet. So in the meantime, I just want to be able to film what I want the best way I can, and to me that's not stereo yet.
Yeah, no,
I said yet, right? It's not that I'm against stereo, it's just that I'm waiting for it to be as good as I need it to be for me to work with.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, can I just say one thing to that very quickly? When we shot The Visitor in stereoscopic, we had an 8-camera rig, and we ended up just stitching 4 of the cameras. And one of the cool things is we've collected that data. In the future, we could go back and actually stitch together a stereoscopic version to help future-proof it when the technology arrives or when the exhibition technology catches up. But we show it in mono, but we have the stereo.
Yeah, we really need computational photography. We really want.
You go into one of the post houses that does the post stereo conversion for movies, and they post convert your stuff into stereo.
That's good, but expensive.
I mean, for me, I've been spoiled, but like the camera that the engineers were building was a stereoscopic camera, so I've been using that, and so it's something called Jump. But the first camera out of the gate from that, it's going to be with a GoPro called the Odyssey. And I'm working on it until that thing is good for you guys, because I'm not going to let that thing out of the gate without it being ready to go. But the great thing about it is this assembler, which basically does, so stitching takes forever, right? You have all these different camera feeds and you have to put them all together and you have to try and make it seamless. But the assembler is this thing that basically combines the 16 GoPros and the footage from these GoPros, overlays it, and creates a seamless environment and returns it in like 24 to 48 hours, which is crazy as a benchmark. And I think definitely to what you're saying right now, it is really tough. But I think very soon it's going to totally change the whole entire game for how we're able to capture
That's
gonna happen.
Let's get another question or two.
Oh,
Running out of
That
time.
was a great question.
It was a great question. Right here in the front. Or actually right there with the mic.
Yeah. Actually, to follow up on what you were just talking about, though, I know, Jess, you probably know a little bit more about what's going on with Google and YouTube, but you guys probably know in general, how is the progression of like the adoption of H.265, which would allow for 8K, and like this movement going forward in terms of like higher compression algorithms, which would allow us to even send out, VR films that are of a higher quality. Like, have you heard anything about that and like an adoption in general? Because isn't that one of the big limitations right now in just getting higher quality footage out there?
There's some really great work being done with adaptive playback, which I think is probably the key to a lot of this stuff, right? Where it's like it basically takes what you see is high res and the rest of it is low res, and as you turn, it kind of adapts. I think that could be really great, because that actually makes the form factor a lot smaller and then allows for these things to be transported on a phone in a way that is, it's still a big file, and it depends on how long the film is and all that other stuff, but that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, just in case people don't know the tech side of that, basically right now, the only video files you can play back for a 360 thing is a 4K video file at 30 frames per second. Ideally, we would want to go to 8K at least 60 frames per second. So you can imagine how the data rate of that is, especially if you have it online streaming. So that's all going to naturally catch up, but just hauling that amount of data around is just something that's going to be a while. But yeah, the biggest thing is streaming, because right now it's stupid. Basically, the 360 plays back and needs to be data streamed, but you only see where you're looking at, which is stupidity, because 80% of the data you don't see, so why the heck is it streamed? But yeah, you're doing some, as far as I know, Google's doing some stuff.
But there's somebody else that's actually doing it that I've seen, but there's just a lot of work.
You're not doing anything? You're not doing anything?
Next question.
We have time for one more question. Someone's ready to get the mic. Go ahead.
Hi. I just wanted to touch on montage for a second. So I've been seeing a lot of experiences that don't cut too often, and I feel viewers kind of lose attention. They have a certain amount of attention. I produced a VR film, a 360 video film, live action, and I think this applies more to live action, but I cut 12 times in 7.5 minutes, and I cut on action sometimes, and I think that presence is important, but montage is also an important part of cinema, if this is kind of cinema in a way. So how do you guys feel about montage and cutting within a scene, within a shot, and how it detracts from presence or adds to the entertainment value?
And let's do these answers in montage style, because we're almost out of time.
Okay, so my answer to you is like, you can do whatever you want as long as it works. And it's not kind of cinema at all. I don't think it's like cinema at all. I think there's a different language to be learned for sure. Like cut to a close-up and you will see what I mean. Cut to a close-up of something and you're going to be a little ant sitting next to that glass instead of looking at a close-up of a glass. The fact that you're looking at the fact that you're in a space instead of looking at the picture really changed the rules of the game. And yeah, you can do montages. You can, I think 12 cuts over 7 minutes is pretty safe. You can do that. My real advice on that regard, and that's what we do all the time, is if you think something will work, just try it out first and make sure it actually does. And there's a lot of things we don't know. So, it might work. I just don't know.
I have Saschka keeps talking about my Medium post. I have a Medium post thing that I'm doing about I'm sorry, I don't usually plug shit like that, but it's basically about editing. It's something I'm actually really passionate about and something I'm working through. First one I did is a montage piece, basically that focuses a lot on that. Biggest thing I would say is right now we've been seeing it as like frame to frame to frame, and really what's been happening or what should be happening is worlds of experience that build upon each other, that you basically can rotate around each other based upon probability, the way that we experience something, the likelihood that someone will look somewhere. And it's not so much cut on action, it's about cutting on attention. And there's a lot of really interesting stuff to play with there. It's definitely possible. And it's really, really cool. And I think a lot of that, if you work backwards, actually helps to break off the idea of storyboarding, narrative, a lot of that stuff. I think it's a key to a lot of really good stuff.
Yeah, read her Medium posts. But I think a lot that actually has happened in the last year, and that I hope will happen more in this year, is initially the discussion was like, this is the right way to do it. Yeah. Don't cut, or do it like this way, or do it like this way. And I think the more people have experimented with it, the clearer it becomes. It is a medium, and there's lots of different ways of doing things. There's not one type of kind of language how you can tell narratives in it. There's very different ways of doing it. That you can do it with interactivity, you can do it without interactivity, you can do it with cutting, you can do it just in one space. Those are kind of like nearly different, not genres, because that would mean something different, but it's broader than just a singular way of telling a story. And there is not like, oh, you're doing it wrong because you're doing cutting, or you're doing it wrong because you're doing it one shot. And that's, I think, to a certain extent, it's a bit blowing my mind, because it was easier when it was like, no, this is right and this is wrong. And now it's kind of, everything's okay.
Very, very, well, and it's the same in cinema, right? Like if you watch a film by Jacques Tati, like he just locks the camera off and builds his story within the frame. Same thing with Roy Anderson. So, and then there are directors who use editing as their primary like propulsion. So it's the same in VR. We're just learning.
We unfortunately have to do it with cutting right now. This is the end of Will VR Kill Film. Thank you, Saschka, Jessica, Luis, and James. We will be back in like 3 minutes with the panel Under $100,000, the key to...
That I'm moderating.
Yeah, the key to success or starvation. So see you very shortly. Thank you.